Hello, and thank you for joining us on this ceasefire moment. Today we're going to take a look at one of our WordPress articles, and we're just going to read through it and maybe add a little bit of discussion as we go. You can find us on WordPress. The link will be in the description and in the first comments below. So let's get started. Today we're just going to look at just the first couple of words of Matthew 28:19. This is the verse better known as the Great Commission. Today we're just looking at where it typically says make disciples, and in some versions you'll see teach. If we take a look at all of these versions right next to each other, we can see right away that this is something that we need to explore. This is why you use a variety of translations, because there is kind of a big difference between make disciples and teach. And you can see the different versions and how many have teach, and how many have make disciples. So again, right off, we can see something that we should explore when we compare the translation versions. And we can see this could be a significant difference if you were trying to create a mission around this Great Commission. There's a difference between when we say recruit and coach. And that's kind of the difference that we're looking at here. If I tell someone to go and teach all of second grade, does that imply that I have to make second grade, or is it assumed that the second grade will be there and I just come in and I teach? And what if I said to go and make second grade? Does that imply that I will also teach them? In most churches today, the mission is typically focused towards the make disciples concept. This tends to translate into phrases such as these, which I found on actual websites. We're here to get people saved by meeting Jesus, bringing Jesus to the, and there's a variety of fill in the blanks there, preaching the gospel, making followers of Jesus, helping people take their next steps towards Jesus, helping the lost and the broken people find Jesus, turning non-Christians into converts, and to bring people to Jesus. Those were just a few that I found in mission statements. When the word teach is used, it translates as teach all nations. By teaching them, will they become disciples? And when the word make is used, it translates as make disciples. Do we make these disciples by teaching them? It seems a bit like the chicken versus the egg question, which came first. So if you have someone teaching and someone turning into a disciple in the end, does it matter? But there is a fundamental difference here, and that's the goal. Is the goal to teach, or is the goal to make disciples? Let's just hold those thoughts for a moment as we look at a unique version. You can find them at HebrewGospels.com, and they can explain to you what their purpose is. They translate it as, therefore go, preach to all the peoples. So they chose the word preach, which is kind of unique because it's usually translated as to teach or to make disciples. But they chose the word preach. Teach, make, and disciple are all verbs. A verb is something that you do. Teacher, maker, and disciple are nouns. Those are something that you are. Notice the word disciple can be in both a verb and a noun format. Let's look at the concordance to see which this word here is. Using the Blue Letter Bible, we can drill down into this word, and when we do that, we can see that this word is actually a verb. It's not a noun. We can also see that there isn't any word after this verb. As you notice, it says, therefore teach all. It goes straight to all nations. There isn't any word for word match to disciple. It's a concept that was added, which can significantly change the goal of someone if this is a verse that they're trying to make into a mission statement, as it is called the Great Commission. When we look at this particular word, we can see where this word is used 4 times in the New Testament. And the only time it is kind of translated in a manner close to make disciples is in Matthew 27. And when we look, you can see that there's a note there, but it's treated special in this particular case. but there is no note on Matthew 28. If we look at the Hebrew word, we see that its actual meaning is to teach, to lead, and to instruct. When we make our way back to the Hebrew, it helps us to make some connections from the Old Testament into the New Testament and follow a concept the whole way through. One of those such places when we go back to the Hebrew is Exodus 24. If we look at all the different translations of this particular verse, we can see it is either teach or instruct. And when we start breaking it down, we can see where Matthew 28:19 kind of matches up pretty well with Exodus 24:12. If we read it here, it says, "Then Adonai said to Moses, 'Come up to me on the mountain and stay there, and I will give you the tablets of stone with the Torah and the mitzvot, which I have written, so that you may instruct them.'" So this kind of lines up with the Great Commission, where Jesus is telling us, go and instruct. The word here is yara. In our English translation, we see it translated in many ways. The King James Version in the Strong's translates it as teach, shoot, archers, cast, teacher, reign, laid, direct, inform, instruct, shooed, shooters through, and water. None of those have anything to do with a disciple. And if you listen to the Bible Project's video on the salt in the land, which you can find a link to in this article, is you will see how they make a connection between Torah, Ora, and Yara. They said that underneath the noun Torah is a Y, but you can hear the rhyming of Or, light, and Tor, Torah. Torah comes from the Hebrew verb of yar. In the yar form, it means to give instruction or to teach someone, which is the version that we're looking at right now, is the yar version. In the form of Torah, it means instruction. God will yar or teach them so that God's Torah instruction will go out to the nations. God's or, a light, to the nations is people walking in his Torah instruction. You can see how rich the Hebrew version is, and a lot of stuff that we miss. When we dive into this, we can see the idea here is to teach and instruct all the nations and peoples. Our focus should be on the teaching, not on the making. By learning God's instruction, living by them, and teaching them, we are fulfilling this part of what Jesus has told his disciples to do in this particular verse. This is exactly what his disciples did at that time, and they changed the world. Those who believed in and wanted to become followers of Jesus went into the synagogues each week and learned from the Old Testament. No one had their own copy, and they had to work to memorize it so that they could then share it. The disciples would keep up with those communities that they couldn't be with in person through letters, and some of those letters are preserved in our New Testament as examples of some of the questions that these communities had as they were trying to adjust to their new way of life. Their previous Jewish and pagan and Gentile traditions were something that they needed to come out of, just like the Israelites came out of Egypt and then was given the Torah, and they were instructed and taught. For both traditions, they had to overcome the requirement to provide blood sacrifices because Jesus was their forever blood sacrifice, and they both had to overcome the idea of working their way back into righteousness through repetitive traditions. Jesus came and brought it back to the heart of things and not the doing of things as was taught by man. Jesus' disciples used the Old Testament to teach what Jesus had done by providing a blood sacrifice which covers the penalty of death for sinning. Jesus set everyone back into right relationship with Yahweh so that they can draw near to him. If you love Yahweh with all your heart, mind, and strength, then you'll follow his ways and his instructions. To sum this all up, basically, in this particular verse, it's talking about to go and teach. Next time, we'll look at who we are to go and teach. Thank you for joining us on this ceasefire moment. We hope you've learned something.